Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the exploration vessel Frontier's Edge, staring at the message that had just arrived through the quantum communication array. The blue glow of the holographic display cast strange shadows across his weathered face as he read the same words for the third time. The message was from the Galactic Council, and it was not what he had expected. For 47 years, Earth had been trying to join the Council. Humanity had sent dozens of applications, each one rejected without explanation. They had tried diplomacy, trade agreements, and even offered to share their technology. Nothing worked. The Council treated Earth like a forgotten backwater planet that had nothing to offer the galaxy. Now, finally, they had received a response. But it was not the welcome Jake had hoped for, Captain. Dr. Lisa Warren stepped onto the bridge, her tablet in hand. She was the ship's xenobiologist, a woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. The communication array picked up something unusual. The entire Council network is buzzing with activity. Jake gestured to the holographic display. Take a look at this, Lisa. Tell me what you think. Lisa moved closer and began reading. Her expression changed from curiosity to concern as she absorbed the contents of the message. This is a combat trial request. They want us to send one person to fight one of theirs. That's right, Jake said, leaning back in his chair. According to this, it's a standard procedure for new species wanting to join the Council. We have to prove our worth through combat, Lisa shook her head. But this doesn't make sense. Combat trials are usually between military forces, not individuals, and look at who they're sending. She pointed to a section of the message. Krekmur, the destroyer, champion of the Zephyrian Empire. I've heard of him. He's never lost a battle. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake had been in space for 15 years, and he had heard stories about the Zephyrians. They were the military backbone of the Galactic Council, a species that had conquered half the known galaxy through sheer force. Their warriors were legendary, standing 8 feet tall with natural armor plating and claws that could cut through starship hull. There's more, Jake said quietly. The trial has to take place on Kepler 442b in 6 weeks. If we don't show up, or if our representative loses, Earth's application will be permanently rejected. Lisa sat down heavily in the nearest chair. They're not giving us a chance, are they? This is their way of saying no without actually saying no. Maybe, Jake replied. But maybe not. Look at the wording here. He highlighted a portion of the message. They specifically requested to face Earth's weakest fighter. Not our strongest, our weakest. That's strange, Lisa admitted. Why would they want to fight our weakest person? Jake stood up and began pacing the bridge. I've been thinking about that. What if this isn't about strength at all? What if they're testing something else? Before Lisa could respond, the communication array chimed again. This time, the incoming message was from Earth Command. Admiral Kate Sullivan's face appeared on the main screen, her expression grim. Captain Morrison, I trust you've received the Council's message. We've been analyzing it for the past 4 hours, and we've reached a decision. Jake straightened. What are your orders, Admiral? You're to proceed to Kepler 442b immediately. We'll have a representative ready for transport within the week. Who are you sending? Jake asked. Admiral Sullivan paused. That's still being decided. Our best military analysts are reviewing every option. Colonel Smith from the Marine Corps, Lieutenant Commander Jones from Special Forces, even some of our enhanced soldiers from the experimental program. Jake nodded, but something felt wrong. Admiral, with respect, I don't think any of those people qualify as our weakest fighter. What do you mean? The message specifically asks for Earth's weakest fighter. If we send our best soldiers, we're not following the terms of the challenge. Admiral Sullivan frowned. Captain, this is about humanity's future in the galaxy. We can't send someone who will definitely lose. But what if losing isn't the point? Jake pressed. What if they're testing our character, not our combat ability? The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Captain, I need you to maintain course for Kepler 442b. We'll have our representative ready in time. Earth Command out. The transmission ended, leaving Jake and Lisa alone on the bridge. They sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in thought. Jake, Lisa said finally, I've been studying the Zephyrians for years. Their culture is built around honor and strength. They respect courage even in defeat. Maybe you're right. Maybe this isn't about winning, Jake nodded slowly. I keep thinking about something my grandfather used to say. He was a farmer in Iowa. Never left the state in his whole life. But he always told me that the strongest person isn't the one who never falls down. It's the one who gets back up. So what are you thinking? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would change everything. I'm thinking we need to find someone who represents the best of humanity, not necessarily the strongest. Like, who? Jake smiled for the first time since receiving the message. Like someone who fixes things instead of breaking them. Someone who helps people instead of hurting them. Someone who faces problems with creativity instead of violence. Lisa raised an eyebrow. You have someone in mind, don't you? Maybe I do, Jake said. But first, I need to talk to the crew. I need to understand what makes us human, what makes us different from every other species in the galaxy. As the Frontier's Edge continued its journey through space, Jake began to formulate a plan. It was risky, possibly even crazy. But sometimes the craziest ideas were the ones that worked. He thought about Pete Collins, the maintenance engineer who had never met a problem he couldn't solve. The quiet man from Kansas who kept their ship running with nothing but spare parts. And determination. The person who everyone came to when things broke down because they knew he would find a way to fix it, maybe. Jake thought that's exactly what humanity needed right now. Not a warrior, but a fixer. Not someone who would fight the Zephyrian champion, but someone who would find a different way to win. The stars streamed past the viewports as the ship traveled toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in days, Jake felt hopeful. Humanity was about to face its greatest challenge, and he was beginning to think they might just have a chance. Pete Collins was lying on his back under a broken atmospheric processor in the engineering bay when he heard footsteps approaching. The machine had been making strange noises for 3 days, and Pete was determined to find out why. His hands moved quickly through the maze of pipes and wires, feeling for loose connections and worn parts. Pete, you down there? Captain Morrison's voice echoed through the engineering bay. Yeah, Captain, just give me a minute. I think I found the problem. Pete's voice was muffled by the machinery above him. He pulled out a small metal part that looked perfectly fine to anyone else, but Pete could see the tiny crack that was causing all the trouble. Pete slid out from under the machine and sat up, wiping his hands on his coveralls. He was 28 years old, average height with brown hair and kind eyes. His face was smudged with grease, and his clothes were covered in the kind of stains that came from years of fixing things. What can I do for you, Captain? Pete asked. Getting to his feet, Captain Morrison looked nervous, which was unusual. Pete had worked on the Frontier's Edge for 3 years, and he had never seen the captain look worried about anything. Pete, I need to talk to you about something important. Can we go somewhere private? Pete nodded and led the captain to a small storage room next to the engineering bay. It was quiet there, away from the constant hum of the ship's engines. Pete closed the door and waited. Pete, what do you know about the Galactic Council? Captain Morrison asked. Not much, Pete replied. Honestly, I know we've been trying to join them for years. Something about trade and cooperation, right? That's right. Well, we finally got a response from them. They want to test us. Pete raised an eyebrow. What kind of test? Captain Morrison took a deep breath. A combat trial. They want us to send one person to fight one of their warriors. If we win, we join the council. If we lose, we're banned forever. Pete was quiet for a moment. That sounds serious. Are you sending Colonel Smith? He's the toughest guy on the ship. That's the thing, Pete. They didn't ask for our strongest fighter. They asked for our weakest. Pete laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. Our weakest? That's weird. What kind of test is that? Captain Morrison's expression didn't change. Pete, I'm not joking. This is real, and I think you should be the one to go. The laughter died in Pete's throat. He stared at the captain, trying to understand what he was hearing. Me, Captain, I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm just a maintenance engineer. I fix things. I don't fight people. I know exactly what you are, Pete. That's why I want you to do this. Pete sat down on a supply crate, his mind racing. Captain, I've never been in a fight in my life. Back home in Kansas, I was the kid who tried to stop fights, not start them. I wouldn't know how to hurt someone if I wanted to. Tell me about Kansas, Pete. Tell me about your life before you joined the Earth Defense Force. Pete was confused by the change of subject, but he answered anyway. I grew up on a farm outside of Topeka. My dad raised corn and soybeans, and my mom kept a small vegetable garden. We weren't rich, but we had everything we needed. What did you do on the farm? Everything, Pete said with a small smile. Fixed tractors, repaired irrigation systems, built fences, maintained the grain silos. If something broke, I figured out how to fix it. My dad used to say I had magic hands. Captain Morrison nodded. When did you realize you were good at fixing things? Pete thought for a moment. I guess I was about 8 years old. Our old tractor broke down during harvest season. My dad was ready to call a mechanic, but I asked if I could look at it first. I crawled under that machine and just looked at everything. After a while, I could see what was wrong. It was like the tractor was telling me what it needed. And you fixed it? Yeah, I did. My dad couldn't believe it. After that, neighbors started bringing their broken equipment to our farm. I never charged them anything. I just liked helping people. Captain Morrison leaned forward. Pete, why did you join the Earth Defense Force? Pete was quiet for a long moment. I wanted to see the stars. I wanted to help people on a bigger scale. When I heard about the exploration missions, I thought, maybe I could help fix things out here too. And have you? I try to. Every day I make sure this ship keeps running. I fix the air recycling system so everyone can breathe. I repair the water purifiers so everyone stays healthy. I maintain the engines so we can get home safely. It's not glamorous, but it's important. Captain Morrison stood up. Pete, I want you to understand something. The alien we're supposed to fight is called Krekmor the Destroyer. He's 8 feet tall, covered in armor plating, and has claws that can cut through metal. He's never lost a battle. Pete swallowed hard. That sounds terrifying. It is. But here's what I think. I think this challenge isn't really about fighting. I think it's about showing who we are as a species. And you, Pete Collins, represent the best of humanity. I don't understand. Most species in the galaxy solve problems with violence. They use strength and force to get what they want? But humans are different. We use our brains. We find creative solutions. We help each other instead of destroying each other. Pete shook his head. Captain, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who fixes things. That's exactly why you're perfect for this job. Pete, I'm not asking you to fight this alien. I'm asking you to solve a problem. The problem is how to beat an unbeatable opponent. And if anyone can figure that out, it's you. Before Pete could respond, the intercom crackled to life. Captain Morrison to the bridge. Priority message from Earth Command. Captain Morrison looked at Pete. Think about it, Pete. We have 6 weeks to get to Kepler 442b. That's 6 weeks for you to figure out how to solve this problem. The captain left Pete alone in the storage room. Pete sat there for a long time, thinking about everything that had just happened. He thought about his life on the farm, about all the broken things he had fixed over the years. He thought about the people who had trusted him to solve their problems. Most of all, he thought about the 8-foot-tall alien warrior who had never lost a battle. Pete had always believed that every problem had a solution. You just had to be patient enough to find it. But this was different. This was about more than just fixing a machine. This was about the future of humanity. Pete stood up and walked back to the engineering bay. The atmospheric processor was still waiting for him, its broken part lying on his workbench. He picked up the small metal piece and examined it closely. Such a tiny thing, but it had been causing problems for the entire ship. Sometimes, Pete thought, the smallest things made the biggest difference. He began to work on the repair, his hands moving with practiced skill. As he worked, he tried to imagine what it would be like to face Krekmur the Destroyer. The thought scared him, but it also made him curious. Every machine had weaknesses. Every system had flaws. Maybe even unbeatable alien warriors had problems that could be solved. Pete finished the repair and tested the atmospheric processor. It hummed quietly, working perfectly. He smiled and wiped his hands on his coveralls. 6 weeks to solve the biggest problem of his life. Pete Collins, the farm boy from Kansas, was about to become humanity's unlikely champion. The news spread through the ship like wildfire. Within hours, everyone on the frontier's edge knew that Pete Collins, the quiet maintenance engineer, had been chosen to represent humanity in the most important fight of their species' history. The reactions were mixed. Some crew members thought Captain Morrison had lost his mind. Others whispered that it was a suicide mission and that Pete was being sacrificed for no good reason. But a few people understood what the captain was trying to do. Dr. Lisa Warren was one of them. She found Pete in the engineering bay 2 days after the announcement, working on a broken food processor as if nothing had changed. "How are you holding up, Pete?" she asked, pulling up a chair next to his workbench. Pete looked up from the machine and shrugged. "I'm okay, I guess. A little nervous, but mostly just trying to understand what I'm supposed to do. Captain Morrison asked me to help you prepare. I've been studying everything we know about the Zephyrians." Pete set down his tools and gave her his full attention. "What can you tell me about them?" Dr. Warren pulled out her tablet and showed him several images. They're reptilian humanoids, about 8 feet tall on average. Their skin is covered in natural armor plating that can stop most conventional weapons. They have retractable claws, enhanced strength, and reaction times that are about 3 times faster than humans. Pete studied the images carefully. They look pretty tough. What else? Their culture is built around combat and conquest. They believe that strength determines worth, and they respect only those who can defeat them in battle. Krekmur the Destroyer is their greatest champion. He says, personally conquered 17 worlds. How does he fight? From what we've seen in the video records, he's aggressive and direct. He uses his size and strength to overpower his opponents quickly. Most fights last less than a minute. Pete nodded thoughtfully. What about weaknesses? Every system has weaknesses. Dr. Warren hesitated. That's the problem, Pete. We haven't found any obvious weaknesses. The Zephyrians have been the dominant military force in the galaxy for centuries. They've perfected their fighting techniques over thousands of years, but they must have some limitations. What about their armor? Is it flexible? Yes, it has. To be for them to move, but it's incredibly strong. Even our most advanced weapons have trouble penetrating it. Pete was quiet for a moment, thinking. Dr. Warren, can I ask you something? Why do you think the captain chose me? I think he sees something in you that you don't see in yourself. Captain Morrison is a smart man. He wouldn't make this decision lightly. Over the following days, other crew members tried to help Pete prepare. Security Chief Don Rodriguez offered to teach him basic combat techniques. Pete spent a few hours learning how to throw a punch and block an attack, but it was clear that he would never be a fighter. Pete, you're thinking too much, Don said, after a particularly frustrating training session. Fighting is about instinct and reaction. You can't analyze your way through a battle. Maybe that's my problem, Pete replied. I analyze everything. It's just how my brain works. Dan shook his head. You need to learn to trust your body, not your mind. But Pete couldn't change who he was. Instead of continuing with combat training, he went back to what he did best. He observed and he learned. Pete spent hours watching videos of Zephyrian combat techniques. He studied their movements, their breathing patterns, the way they shifted their weight before attacking. He treated it like he was trying to understand a complex machine. You're wasting your time, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Bell told him one day. You should be building up your strength, not watching videos. Maybe, Pete said, but I want to understand how they work. They work by being bigger and stronger than you. That's all there is to it. Pete didn't argue, but he kept watching. He noticed things that the combat analysts had missed. The way Creckmore favored his right side. The slight hesitation before his most powerful attacks. The fact that he always moved in straight lines, never using curved or unpredictable paths. Dr. Warren found him in the observation lounge one evening, still watching combat footage. Pete, you've been at this for 12 hours. You need to rest. Seeing patterns, Pete said without looking away from the screen. Creckmore isn't just strong, he's predictable. What do you mean? Pete paused the video and pointed at the screen. Look at this fight, and this one, and this one. He always starts the same way. He always ends the same way. He's like a machine following a program. Dr. Warren sat down next to him. That's interesting. Most fighters develop habits over time, but Creckmore has been fighting for so long that his patterns are probably deeply ingrained. Exactly. And if I can predict what he's going to do, maybe I can find a way to work around it. Pete, even if you can predict his moves, you still can't match his strength or speed. Pete smiled for the first time in days. Dr. Warren, have you ever tried to move a 2-ton tractor? No, of course not. Neither have I, but I've moved dozens of them. You don't push against 2 tons of metal, you use leverage. You use the machine's own weight against it. Dr. Warren's eyes widened as she began to understand what Pete was thinking. You're not planning to fight him, you're planning to redirect him. Maybe I'm still working on it. That night, Pete had trouble sleeping. He kept thinking about the farm back in Kansas, about all the problems he had solved over the years. He remembered the time the old grain silo had threatened to collapse. During a storm. His father had wanted to tear it down, but Pete had found a way to brace it using the wind's own force. He remembered the irrigation system that had broken down during the worst drought in decades. Everyone said it was impossible to fix, but Pete had found a way to reroute the water using gravity and pressure. He remembered dozens of other problems that had seemed impossible at first, but there was always a solution. You just had to be creative enough to find it. 3 weeks into the journey, something interesting happened. Pete was in the medical bay getting a routine checkup when Dr. Warren discovered something unusual in his brain scans. Pete, I need to show you something, she said, pulling up the scan results on her computer. Your brain activity is unlike anything I've ever seen. Is that bad? Not bad, different. Look at this. She pointed to areas of his brain that were lighting up in unusual patterns. When most people solve problems, they use specific parts of their brain, but you're using your entire brain at once. It's like you're processing information on multiple levels simultaneously. Pete looked at the colorful brain scan. What does that mean? It means your intuition about mechanical systems isn't just experience. It's a form of enhanced spatial and physical intelligence. You can see patterns and relationships that other people miss. So I'm not just good at fixing things. You're good at understanding how things work on a fundamental level. Pete, this might be exactly what you need to defeat Creckmore. That evening, Captain Morrison called Pete to his quarters. Pete, we'll reach Kepler 442B in 3 weeks. How are you feeling about the challenge? Pete sat down across from the captain. Honestly, I'm scared. But I think I'm starting to understand what you want me to do. What's that? You don't want me to fight Creckmore. You want me to solve him, Captain Morrison smiled. Tell me what you've learned. Creckmore is like a machine. He's powerful and efficient, but he's also predictable. He follows patterns. And, every pattern has flaws. What kind of flaws? Pete leaned forward. He's used to opponents who try to match his strength. But what if I don't fight him at all? What if I just let him fight himself? Captain Morrison raised an eyebrow. Explain. It's like this, Captain. If you have a machine that's designed to push against resistance, what happens when there's no resistance to push against? It overextends itself. Exactly. And when a machine overextends, it becomes vulnerable. Captain Morrison nodded slowly. Pete, I think you might actually have a chance. Pete looked out the viewport at the stars streaming past. I hope so, Captain. Because if I'm wrong, humanity loses its chance to join the galaxy. And if you're right, Pete smiled. If I'm right, The galaxy is about to learn that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to think differently about it. The planet Kepler 442b hung in space like a gray marble, its surface covered in ancient stone structures that had been built millions of years ago. The Frontier's Edge entered orbit alongside dozens of other ships from across the galaxy. Everyone had come to watch humanity's test. Pete stood at the observation deck, looking down at the planet where his fate would be decided. His hands were steady, but his heart was beating fast. In 6 hours, he would face Krekmar the destroyer in single combat. "The shuttle is ready," Captain Morrison said as he joined Pete at the window. "Are you ready?" Pete nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be. Remember what we talked about. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about showing the galaxy who we are." "I understand, Captain." Dr. Warren approached with a small device in her hand. "Pete, I want you to wear this. It's a medical monitor. It will track your vital signs during the fight." Pete clipped the device to his belt. "Will it help?" "It will help us understand what happens, whatever the outcome." The shuttle ride to the planet's surface was quiet. Pete sat between Captain Morrison and Dr. Warren, watching the alien landscape grow larger through the viewport. The arena was built into the side of a massive mountain, carved from black stone that gleamed like metal in the sunlight as they landed. Pete could see thousands of aliens gathering in the viewing areas around the arena. They were tall, blue-skinned beings with 4 arms, small furry creatures with large eyes, and dozens of other species he had never seen before. All of them had come to watch him fight. The shuttle touched down on a landing pad near the arena entrance. As the doors opened, Pete was hit by the sounds of the crowd. They were making noises he had never heard before, clicks and whistles and roars that seemed to echo off the stone walls. "That's a lot of people," Pete said quietly. "They're here to see history," Captain Morrison replied. "One way or another, this fight will be remembered." A group of officials met them at the entrance. They were members of different species, all wearing the same dark blue robes that marked them as Galactic Council representatives. The leader was a tall, thin being with gray skin and large black eyes. "I am Counselor Vexstar," the alien said, in perfect English. "You must be the human representative." "I'm Pete Collins," Pete replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Counselor Vexstar looked him up and down with obvious disappointment. "You are smaller than I expected." "Are you certain this is your choice?" "He's our choice," Captain Morrison said firmly. "Very well. The trial will begin in 1 hour. The human will be examined first to ensure he carries no weapons or enhancements." Pete was led to a small chamber where alien medical devices scanned his entire body. The results appeared on a screen that the officials studied carefully. "He is unmodified," one of them announced. "No weapons, no enhancements, no artificial implants. He's completely natural." "That's unusual," another official commented. "Most species enhance their warriors before combat trials. Humans are different." Dr. Warren said, "We believe in natural ability." Pete was given a simple gray uniform to wear and a pair of soft boots. No armor, no protection of any kind. The rules were clear. This was to be combat in its purest form. As they walked toward the arena, Pete could hear the crowd getting louder. The sound was overwhelming, like standing next to a waterfall. He had never been in front of so many people. Before, the arena itself was a perfect circle, 100 meters across, made of smooth metal that reflected the light from above. There were no weapons, no obstacles, nowhere to hide. Just empty space surrounded by thousands of watching aliens. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Galactic Council," a voice boomed across the arena. "Today we witness a combat trial between the Zephyrian Empire and the planet Earth, representing the Zephyrian Empire, the undefeated champion of 17 worlds, Krekmar the Destroyer." The crowd erupted in cheers as a massive figure entered the arena from the opposite side. Krekmar was even bigger than Pete had imagined. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, his body covered in dark green scales that looked like armor plating. His claws glinted in the light as he raised his arms to acknowledge the crowd. Pete watched as Krekmar demonstrated his strength for the audience. The alien warrior picked up a metal beam that had been placed in the arena and crushed it in his bare hands. The crowd roared its approval. And representing the planet Earth, the announcer continued, Pete Collins? Pete walked into the arena, and the crowd fell silent. The contrast was shocking. Where Kreckmer looked like a living weapon, Pete looked like an ordinary man who had gotten lost on his way to work. His gray uniform was loose-fitting, and his soft boots made no sound on the metal floor. Some of the aliens in the crowd began making what sounded like laughter. Others seemed confused, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. "Are you certain this is your warrior?" War Commander Thextile called out from the viewing platform. "This appears to be some kind of mistake." "No mistake, Captain Morrison," replied firmly. "Pete Collins is our representative." Pete walked to the center of the arena and looked up at Kreckmore. The alien warrior was studying him with obvious confusion. Pete could see intelligence in those reptilian eyes, but also something else. Kreckmore was used to opponents who challenged him, who tried to match his strength and ferocity. Pete was something entirely different. "Human," Kreckmore said in a voice like grinding stone, "I do not understand why you are here. You are small and weak. This will not be a worthy battle." "Maybe not," Pete replied, "but I'm here anyway." The officials completed their final checks. Both fighters were scanned one more time to ensure no hidden weapons. The arena was cleared of all obstacles. The crowd settled into expectant silence. "The trial will begin when the horn sounds," Counselor Vextar announced. "Combat will continue until one fighter is unable to continue or surrenders. There are no other rules." Pete took a deep breath and tried to calm his racing heart. He thought about his farm in Kansas, about all the problems he had solved over the years. He thought about the grain silo in the storm, the broken irrigation system, the countless machines he had fixed with nothing but creativity and determination. This was just another problem to solve. A very large, very dangerous problem, but still, just a problem. Kreckmore moved to his starting position, his claws extended and ready. He looked like a predator preparing to strike. The crowd held its breath. Pete stood in the center of the arena, his hands at his sides, looking calm and relaxed. He had no weapons, no armor, no plan that anyone could see. To the watching aliens, he looked like he was about to be destroyed, but Pete wasn't thinking about destruction. He was thinking about patterns and leverage and the way machines worked. When they were pushed beyond their limits, the horn sounded. Kreckmer charged forward with incredible speed, his claws aimed at Pete's chest. The crowd gasped as the massive alien closed the distance in seconds. Pete didn't move. He stood perfectly still, watching and calculating as 9 feet of armored death rushed toward him. Time seemed to slow down as he observed every detail of Kreckmore's attack. The angle of approach, the distribution of weight, the exact moment when the alien would be committed to his strike at the last possible second. Pete stepped aside. Kreckmore's claws whistled through empty air as he thundered past, his momentum carrying him toward the arena wall. The alien warrior tried to stop, but his own speed worked against him. He crashed into the metal barrier with a sound like thunder. The crowd fell silent. This was not how these fights usually began. Pete stood calmly in the center of the arena, watching as Kreckmore got back to his feet. The alien warrior looked confused and angry. "You run like a coward," Kreckmore snarled. "I'm not running," Pete replied. "I'm thinking." Kreckmore charged again, this time trying to corner Pete against the arena wall. But Pete had studied the alien's movements for weeks. He knew exactly where Kreckmore would go and exactly when he would strike. Once again, Pete stepped aside at the perfect moment. Once again, Kreckmore crashed into the wall. The crowd began to murmur. Some of the aliens were confused. Others were starting to understand that something unusual was happening. Pete Collins, the maintenance engineer from Kansas, was not trying to fight Kreckmore the Destroyer. He was trying to solve him. Kreckmore stood at the edge of the arena, breathing heavily. His scales were scratched from hitting the wall twice, and his eyes showed something Pete had never seen in the combat videos. Confusion. The alien warrior was used to opponents who fought back. He was used to claws meeting claws, strength against strength. But Pete wasn't fighting at all. He was just standing there, watching and waiting. "What are you doing, human?" Kreckmore demanded. "Why do you not attack?" Pete remained calm, his hands still at his sides. "I'm learning." The crowd was getting restless. Thousands of aliens were clicking, whistling, and roaring their confusion. This wasn't how combat trials were supposed to work. Where was the violence? Where was the struggle? War Commander Thextal stood up in the viewing area. "This is not combat. The human is making a mockery of our traditions." But Counselor Vextar raised a hand for silence. "The rules state that combat continues until one fighter cannot continue. Both fighters are still standing. The trial continues." Kreckmore circled Pete slowly, looking for an opening. His claws scraped against the metal floor, making a sound like fingernails on glass. Pete turned to keep facing him, but he didn't raise his hands or take a fighting stance. "You cannot avoid me forever, human," Kreckmore said. "Eventually you will make a mistake, maybe," Pete replied. "But you're making mistakes right now?" Kreckmore's eyes narrowed. "What mistakes?" Pete pointed to the scratches on the arena wall where Kreckmore had crashed. "You're fighting the same way you always fight, but I'm not like your other opponents." For the first time in his life, Kreckmore hesitated. He had fought hundreds of battles across the galaxy, but he had never faced someone who talked to him during combat, someone who analyzed him like he was a broken machine. The hesitation lasted only a second, but Pete saw it. The doubt in Kreckmore's eyes, the uncertainty in his stance. The alien warrior was starting to question his own abilities. Kreckmore attacked again, but this time he was more careful. He moved slower, trying to anticipate where Pete would dodge. But Pete had been watching him for weeks. He knew that Kreckmore always favored his right side when he was being cautious. Pete stepped to the left, and Kreckmore's claws missed by inches. The alien warrior spun around, trying to catch Pete off guard with his tail. But Pete had seen this move dozens of times in the combat videos. He dropped to one knee, and the tail swept over his head. As Kreckmore completed his spin, Pete did something unexpected. He reached out and touched the alien's leg. Just for a moment, Kreckmore jumped back as if he had been burned. "What are you doing?" "Testing something," Pete said. The touch had told Pete everything he needed to know. Kreckmore's scales were indeed as hard as armor, but they were also heavy. The alien warrior was carrying hundreds of pounds of natural protection, and that weight affected how he moved. Pete began to move differently. Instead of just dodging attacks, he started guiding them. When Kreckmore lunged forward, Pete stepped aside and gently pushed the alien's shoulder, sending him further in the wrong direction. When Kreckmore tried to grab him, Pete ducked under the alien's arm and tapped his elbow, making the grab go wide. It was like redirecting water in an irrigation system. You didn't stop the flow, you just changed where it went. The crowd was now completely silent. They were watching something they had never seen before. A tiny human was making the galaxy's greatest warrior look clumsy and confused. Dr. Warren watched from the viewing area, her tablet recording every moment. "His vital signs are completely normal," she whispered to Captain Morrison. "His heart rate is actually slower than when he's fixing machines." "He's in his element," Captain Morrison replied. "This is what he does. He solves problems." Kreckmore was getting frustrated. He had been fighting for 20 minutes, and he hadn't landed a single hit on the human. Worse, he was getting tired. His heavy scales, which had always been his greatest protection, were now working against him. "Stand still and fight," Kreckmore roared. "I am fighting," Pete said calmly. "Just not the way you expected." Kreckmore charged again, putting all his strength into one massive attack. His claws were extended, his muscles were tensed, and his weight was committed to the strike. Pete waited until the last possible moment, then did something that shocked everyone watching. Instead of dodging, he stepped forward. He grabbed Kreckmore's wrist as the alien's claws whistled past his head. Using the warrior's own momentum, Pete spun around and guided the attack toward one of the support pillars that held up the arena's viewing area. Kreckmore's claws, moving with tremendous force, struck the pillar and buried themselves deep in the stone. The alien warrior was stuck, the crowd gasped. For the first time in the fight, Krekmar was vulnerable, but Pete didn't attack. He stepped back and waited. Krekmar struggled to free his claws from the stone pillar. His scales scraped against the rock as he pulled and twisted. Finally he broke free, but the effort had cost him. The alien warrior was breathing hard now. Sweat was running down his scales, and his movements were slower than before. "How?" Krekmar asked, staring at Pete in amazement. "How are you doing?" "This? The same way I fix everything else," Pete replied. "I watch, I learn, I find the weak points. I have no weak points." Pete shook his head. "Everyone has weak points." "Even you?" Krekmar attacked again, but now his strikes were wild and desperate. He was no longer following his trained patterns. He was improvising, and improvisation was not his strength. Pete continued to redirect each attack, using Krekmar's size and weight against him. When the alien tried to grab him, Pete guided the grab into another pillar. When Krekmar tried to tackle him, Pete stepped aside and let the warrior crash into the arena floor. Each time, Krekmar got a little more tired. Each time, his movements became a little more predictable. The alien spectators were now watching in complete amazement. Some of them were recording the fight, knowing that no one would believe what they were seeing without proof. A human, the weakest species anyone knew about, was defeating the galaxy's greatest warrior without throwing a single punch. After 30 minutes of fighting, Krekmar was exhausted. His breathing was labored, his scales were covered in scratches, and his movements had become slow and clumsy. Pete, meanwhile, looked exactly the same as when the fight had started. Calm, relaxed, and completely in control. "This is impossible," Krekmar gasped. "You should be dead." "I should have killed you 10 times over. You tried," Pete said. "But you were fighting yourself as much as you were fighting me." Krekmar raised his claws for one final attack. He gathered all his remaining strength and charged forward with everything he had left. Pete watched him come, calculating the angle and speed just like he had done dozens of times before. At the perfect moment, he stepped to the side and placed his hand on Krekmar's back. It was the gentlest touch imaginable, barely enough pressure to guide a falling leaf. But it was perfectly timed and perfectly placed. Krekmar's own momentum carried him forward. His heavy body, exhausted from 30 minutes of fruitless combat, could not change direction. He slid across the smooth arena floor like a piece of machinery that had lost its balance. The alien warrior hit the far wall with a tremendous crash and collapsed to the ground. He tried to get up, struggled for a moment, then fell back down. Krekmar the Destroyer, undefeated champion of 17 worlds, lay unconscious on the arena floor. Pete Collins, maintenance engineer from Kansas, stood alone in the center of the arena. The silence was complete. Thousands of aliens stared in shock at what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, one alien began to click its approval. Another joined in with a low whistle. Within moments, the entire arena erupted in the loudest cheers Pete had ever heard. He had done the impossible. He had defeated the undefeatable, and he had done it without violence, without anger, without hatred. He had done it the human way. By thinking. The medical team rushed onto the arena floor to check on Krekmar. The great warrior was alive but unconscious, his breathing steady but labored. Pete stood nearby, watching the alien doctor's work with the same careful attention he gave to everything else. "Is he going to be okay?" Pete asked one of the medics. The alien doctor looked up in surprise. In all his years of treating combat trial injuries, no victor had ever asked about their defeated opponent's health. "He will recover," the doctor replied. "He is exhausted and bruised, but not seriously injured." Pete nodded with obvious relief. "Good, I was worried I might have hurt him." War Commander Thextal jumped down from the viewing platform, his face twisted with anger and disbelief. "This is impossible. There must have been some kind of trickery. Scan the human again." "Commander Thextal," Counselor Vextar said firmly. The combat was observed by thousands of witnesses and recorded from every angle. There was no trickery. Then how? How did this weak little creature defeat our greatest warrior? Dr. Warren stepped forward from the viewing area. "If I may explain, honored counselors." Counselor Vextar gestured for her to continue. "What you Witnessed today was not combat as your species understand it. Pete Collins did not defeat Kreckmore through strength or speed. He defeated him through intelligence. Intelligence? War Commander Thextel scoffed. Combat is about power, not thinking. That's exactly why you lost, Pete said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. You assumed that because I was smaller and weaker I couldn't win. But I wasn't trying to be stronger than Kreckmore. I was trying to be smarter. Captain Morrison joined the group on the arena floor. Counselors, what you've seen today represents the essence of humanity. We don't solve problems with force. We solve them with creativity. Explain this creativity, Counselor Vextar said. He seemed genuinely curious rather than angry. Pete looked around at the gathered aliens. Where I come from, we have a saying. When you can't go through something, you go around it. Kreckmore was trying to go through me, but I went around him. You mean you avoided him? No, I mean I redirected him. Like water in a pipe. If you try to stop water with force, the pipe breaks. But if you redirect the water, you can control where it goes. Dr. Warren pulled out her tablet and showed the brain scan data to the counselors. Humans have evolved a unique form of intelligence. We see patterns and connections that other species miss. We can understand complex systems intuitively. This is why we should fear them? War Commander Thextel exclaimed. If their weakest fighter can defeat our strongest, what could their warriors do? You're missing the point, Pete said. I'm not a fighter at all. I'm a maintenance engineer. I fix things. That's what I do every day. Then what does that make you? Counselor Vextar asked. Pete thought for a moment. I guess it makes me a problem solver, and Kreckmore was just another problem to solve. The counselor was quiet for a long time, considering this. Finally, he spoke. In all our records of combat trials, spanning thousands of years and hundreds of species, we have never seen anything like this. Most species try to prove their worth through displays of strength. You proved your worth by showing us something entirely new. Kreckmore was beginning to wake up. He sat up slowly, his head in his hands. When he saw Pete standing nearby, his eyes widened with memory. You, Kreckmore said weakly. You defeated me, but how? I felt no pain. You struck no blows. Pete walked over and knelt down beside the alien warrior. I didn't want to hurt you. I just needed to show that there are different ways to solve problems. Different ways? Kreckmore repeated, as if the concept was foreign to him. Yeah, where I come from, we believe that violence should be the last choice, not the first. There's usually a better way to handle things. Kreckmore stared at Pete for a long moment. Then slowly, the great warrior began to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the arena. I have conquered 17 worlds, Kreckmore said. I have defeated warriors from every corner of the galaxy, and I was beaten by someone who didn't want to fight at all. You weren't beaten, Pete said. You just learned something new. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session that evening. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to discuss what they had witnessed. The debate went on for hours, with some arguing that the trial had been invalid and others insisting that humanity had passed the test in the most impressive way possible. Counselor Vextar called for a vote. All those in favor of granting Earth membership in the Galactic Council, one by one, hands, tentacles, and claws were raised. Even War Commander Thextal, after a long hesitation, voted in favor. The vote was unanimous. Pete was in the medical bay getting checked over when Captain Morrison brought him the news. Congratulations, Pete. You did it. Earth is now a member of the Galactic Council? Pete smiled tiredly. That's good. I was worried for a while there. Pete, do you understand what you've accomplished? You've changed how the entire galaxy thinks about humanity. I hope so. Maybe now they'll see that we're not trying to conquer anyone. We just want to help. Dr. Warren entered the medical bay with a datapad in her hands. Pete, I've been analyzing the recordings of the fight. The alien scientists are amazed. They want to study human problem-solving techniques. Are you okay with that? Captain Morrison asked. Pete shrugged. Sure, if it helps them understand us better. 3 days later, the Frontier's Edge prepared to leave. Kepler 442b, the ship's cargo bay was filled with gifts from various alien species, tokens of respect for humanity's new status in the galaxy. Pete was back in the engineering bay, working on a cooling system that had been acting up. His hands moved with their usual skill, finding and fixing problems that others couldn't even see. "Pete," Captain Morrison said as he entered the engineering bay, "I have new orders from Earth Command." Pete looked up from his work. "What kind of orders?" "You've been promoted. Earth is putting together a new exploration fleet, and they want you to lead a special team." "What kind of team?" "Problem solvers. People like you who can think differently about challenges. Earth Command is calling it the Diplomatic Solutions Division." Pete considered this. "What would I do?" "The same thing you've always done. Fix things, help people, solve problems that seem impossible." Pete smiled and turned back to his work. "That sounds good, Captain. When do we start?" "As the Frontiers." Edge left orbit around Kepler 442b. Pete Collins continued to work in the engineering bay. He had become the most famous human in the galaxy, the man who had changed everything with a single fight. But to Pete, he was still just a maintenance engineer from Kansas who liked to fix things. The galaxy, however, would never be the same. Humanity had shown them that there were alternatives to violence, different ways to approach problems, and new possibilities for cooperation and understanding. Other species began to study human techniques for conflict resolution, trade agreements, replaced military conquests. Diplomatic solutions became more valued than shows of strength. Krekmar himself requested transfer to a new position in the Zephyrian government, one focused on peaceful problem-solving rather than warfare. He often told other aliens about the day a small human taught him that true strength came from the mind, not the muscles. War Commander Thextal was forced to admit that the Zephyrians had much to learn from humanity. The Empire began shifting resources from military expansion to exploration and cooperation, and Pete Collins continued to fix things, one problem at a time, showing the galaxy that sometimes the best solution was the one nobody expected: the farm. Boy from Kansas had saved humanity's future by doing what he did best. He had looked at an impossible problem and found a way to solve it. In the years that followed, when young aliens heard the story of humanity's entry into the Galactic Council, they learned an important lesson. Strength wasn't about how hard you could hit. Intelligence wasn't about how much you could memorize. True power came from the ability to see problems differently and find solutions that helped everyone. And sometimes, the person who seemed the weakest turned out to be the strongest of all.